Hello and welcome to the EU Power Rankings going into 2021. You're seeing a lot of teams on screen, and throughout, I imagine, all of January, we're going to be able to rank all of these teams here, but I'm sure there'll be a few others that will enter the fold. With me are two content creators that you've probably heard of, Strong and Anderzz, that not only have made videos or articles about the European scene, but have actually worked in some capacity with scouting, or at least helping some of these teams. We're actually going to be taking on the big guns. We're going to be taking on Team Heretics, as well as the newest iteration of Funplus Phoenix. And I guess already, we want to make sure that this episode doesn't go on for too long, but you would assume it would be like on screen, but considering I've spoken to you guys before about this, you might argue against it, but I'm not sure who's going to argue for it more.
Do you want to take it first, or should I, Strong?
So, the question is, where do we start, right? I guess we have to start with the reigning champions, the kings of Europe, second generation, Team Heretics, right? So, and I think Anders agrees with me with this, Team Heretics are not going to be as good as you think they're going to be. And obviously there's a lot going on in Europe. A lot of teams are moving around. Heretics are, to be clear here, Heretics are not moving their roster at all. They use, from everything we've heard, everything's in the public domain, everything's in the private domain. They are going to be the same roster as they were for First Strike and before. So that was Avova, that was Pora, that was Niso, that was Lowell, and that was Nukier. Same roster. That's
a key thing to mention about this as well. We're not really looking at the rumored rosters. We're only going to be locking in teams on the ladder when they've finalized it. So, you know, it's safe to assume that G2 Esports are going to be having Zeke in their roster, but we're not going to include them just in case they don't. I think Team Liquid's a really good example of that. We were going to include them in this episode with just Team Heretics, but with the whole Zhugi rumor, it's a bit volatile that we don't want to necessarily assume that Team Liquid are changing. But Team Heretics, why would they change? They won First Strike, and I guess the main thing is that this is a power ranking based on how they're looking going into 2021. This isn't a HLTV best of 2020 kind of thing. This is, all right, yeah, Team Heretics are looking to, I'd say, still be a top 5 team. But in the case of Heretics versus FPX, why do you think that FPX are going to be going into 2021 as the better team out of these two at least? Is it more that Team Heretics are looking to be counter-stratted with their very consistent but very self-respective style, like they play with the Sage all of the time? Or is it that FPX with Dimasic are going to look a lot stronger? I guess, Anders, you can go on that one.
It's a story of Heretics has to show us that they have more than one trick in the book. The reality is that they won First Strike off of playing a style that people had shied away from, which is the high timing disruption, fairly passive defaulty Sage version of the game, which was super common in beta, disappeared completely. People lost any sort of form that they had and comfortability they had with playing against it. And then Heretics just windmill slammed it at them again in First Strike. So it caught people off guard. To a certain degree, it was cheesy, but it also wasn't cheesy because it was a valid approach. For Heretics to remain at the top of the ladder, or near the top of the ladder even, they have to show us that they have more than just that one style. And thus far, that doesn't exist, which is why I cannot put them higher than FPX. Because FPX has shown us already they can play more than one style. We see that they were more or less the pioneers of the early stage, Brimstone, Breach, Cypher, Bind setup that became the gold standard. And since then, they've completely pivoted into a different dimension with sort of a pseudo-Sentinel Viper setup that even Summon FC is using to high effect now. We've seen for a fact that FPX has multidimensionality, and we haven't seen that proof of concept yet with Heretics.
Yeah. And I think one of the really interesting things about Heretics for me is, and this is always interesting, right, in teams, when you see a team in a tactical shooter where they play one side of the map so much better than the other, and you kind of try to figure out why. And this has been the case with Heretics. I looked this up in terms of stats. Heretics were going, if you look at the qualifiers and you look at I think I looked at this after quarterfinals of First Strike. They were by far the most CT-sided, D-sided, however we're going to call it, team in Europe. They were far, far stronger on the defensive side than they were on the attacking side. And there is the odd loss in there now and again, right? And there's one loss, if anyone wants to go watch a VOD, watch the game between Heretics and Needmore DM. It's in the final of one of the cups. They lost, Heretics at the Series 2-1, they lost on Ascent. I looked at it and looked why. And the reason was, it is quite simple. So, Pora isn't the star player of that team, in my view. Niso is the star player. But Pora is so important to what they do. And what he's doing isn't particularly sophisticated. It's not some mad tactical sort of mastermind. What he's doing is fairly simple in terms of he's just an absolute genius. He's a good rifler, and he's a genius in terms of where he picks his timings and where he picks to go contact. And this applies on both the attacking and the defensive side. But it's more important on the defensive side, because the reason Heretics have the best defense in Europe is down to a lot to two players. It's down to Niso and it's down to Pora. Niso, just because he's a ridiculously good instinctive player. Like, his read on the game is absolutely insane. Like, he knows exactly where to pick spots. He's not particularly aggressive. But Pora is also incredibly smart, but he's a lot more aggressive. And you see a lot of their success comes from, okay, Pora's just pushed mid with Cypher with no smokes, and he's hit them at the right time. He's not been challenged. They've come up to contact. He's won the contact. If you look at Heretics on attack, the reason they're not so good is because they don't have a plan at all. Their plan on attack is also, Niso isn't the same sort of player in that regard, but Pora just does contact. And I think in that Ascent game against Nemo DM, he starts on defense. They know what they figure him out almost immediately. I think he was on Killjoy that game, actually, rather than his usual. Like, he usually plays Cypher, right? He was on Killjoy. They figured out almost immediately. He went, I think, 0-7 in the first 6 rounds.
Is it fair to say that Heretics are still a top 2 team? Because I remember talking about this as Heretics won First Strike. And I think it was even you, Strong, that said, you've got to see Team Heretics as the best team because they Royal Roaded it. They beat Team Liquid, who, in hindsight, looked very good to have a close game there. They beat G2. And I would say that they confidently won against Summon no stretch. Would you still consider them to be, I guess, top 3 at worst? Or do you think that because of the way that they play, the counter-stratting potential, more people have got hands on API stats now, in case you haven't noticed with everybody talking about Run It Back, for example. Do Heretics seem to have the most to lose, I think, out of those top 3 teams?
Yeah. So this is my take, and it goes back to what I was saying, where they have to show us a different layer, a different style, another dimension to their play. If they continue to only play this one style, I think that they will dip into the bottom third of the top 10. We're talking a 7th to 10th, maybe even 10th to 12th place team. If they show us another layer, another style that they can pull out, I think that they float in the 5th to 8th range. I don't think there's a world where they remain top 5. That might sound crazy and be hot take-ish, but that's how I feel about it. If you are putting them top 3, you are assuming that their style of play, that one-dimensional counter-timing Sage setup, will have long enough legs that it will still be functional, not only when Champions Tour and these new events start, but when there's new agents added to the game. Like, there's going to be huge meta shifts. To assume that they can still get away with the same style they've been playing since they were Team Inferno is a little bit ambitious. Are they a bunch of cracked players who have a lot of mechanical skill and strong fundamentals? Absolutely. But if you put them in an environment where walling off something early in a game to deny space and then using slow orbs to counter execute timings is no longer a functional strategy, I don't think they're that good anymore. Until I'm proven wrong, that is a valid criticism and a valid concern.
And I mean, to be fair, with Heretics, they've had to do that a lot already. You were one of the only few people that guessed that they would get to the finals, never mind win it. So why did you see them so highly then, and why are you almost sort of U-turning, a lot of U-turning?
Because they hadn't shown their trump card yet. Now people know what they are doing. So Heretics was the beneficiary of the fact that, again, to sort of go down this road, everyone used to play this style, like a counter timing. We use Sage to stall. You literally can't break our defense unless you have such a deep pool of utility that you can execute multiple times. People then stopped playing that because of the Sage nerfs, and so everyone forgot that they couldn't just execute willy-nilly, that there was an agent in the game that could hard stuff your preliminary bursts. And so you had teams who were just walking through the paces, more or less, going to their standard execute timings, getting slow orbed off and being like, well, crap, we don't have util to exec anymore, and they just have better firepower and better entrenchment than we do. How do we beat this? Like, they would castle up, break your preliminary exec timing, and then you would be like, huh, I don't know what to do. Sorry. And that's how they won. Now that teams have seen that style, though, and realize that that is something that is still in the mix that they have to work around, you're going to have teams who are going to come with active contingency plans. When their timings get broken, they're not going to sit there with their hands in the air like they were during First Strike. They're going to be like, all right, this is what we do when our timing's broken. We pause, we do X, Y, or Z. We save this util for our second phase exec. We play off of the second CD cycle. Like, there's so many layers to it that I think people weren't prepared for from Heretics and First Strike that they're now absolutely going to be prepared for moving forward. And I think that it ultimately makes Heretics' style far weaker than something that is sort of a top flight strategy.
I mean, I wouldn't go as far as that and to say they're outside that I think there's a likelihood they'll fall out the top 10. I think they'll still be there or thereabouts, but I can definitely see the world where they drop very quickly, being a 5th or 6th best team, and then obviously that's really the first test they've had, right? That you have to sort of see how they rebound from there. I feel like they are a team that could be very, very vulnerable to counter-stratting, just because of how much of their defense is built around 2 players and how much of their offense is not particularly sophisticated. It's just based around it's all go to one site, go keep Pora going, please get the time to kill Pora, great 5v4, we win. That's their attack right now. And can that become more sophisticated? Yeah. Will it become more sophisticated? Well, we've seen plenty of times with teams already in Europe where it hasn't and the team's fallen off as a result. So
they can't afford to take the foot off the pedal. In fact, they've got to be doubling down now, because you see it with like Sentinels and even 100 Thieves at this point. As soon as you get to the top, people are gunning for you. But going on to FPX, I feel like when it comes to these two teams in particular, at least Team Heretics have won something. Unlike FPX that have people act like, I don't think they're necessarily the best team in Europe, because how can you say that they're the best team in Europe when they've not won anything? And there's now been a couple of teams now that have managed to sort of put them out of their misery. And I think that's my problem with FPX. So did you have that opinion that they should be the best team going into 2021, at least out of these two teams? Or was it that Dimasic move that maybe swayed you?
I'm not sure that they needed to make a move, but they did make a move, so whatever. But Dimasic was the right move. Because everybody forgot about this guy for some reason. I don't know what it is. Like, it feels like this sometimes happens with CIS players. It kind of the same happened to Chihuahua almost. Remember when Chihuahua was killing it in beta with Hipson and the worst players? There's some weird that team disbands. There's some weird stuff, and we just don't hear from Chihuahua for like 3 months. And he suddenly turns up again and nip, and everyone realizes, oh, Chihuahua's really good. It's the same with Dimasic. Dimasic was sick as hell in worst players. He was really, really good, and he was doing it on. I mean, obviously the funny thing with Dimasic was he was doing it on literally 100 ping, because he's out somewhere in the wilds, right? But he was excelling in beta. But Dimasic is an incredibly good player. He's one of those guys like someone like Happy, where it's like, okay, he's in CS he was not tier 1 player, or he hadn't been tier 1 for a long time. He was kind of a solidly tier 2 player for a long time, but he got this game very, very quickly.
I think FPX should have won First Strike, if I'm being completely candid. I think that bind map, they threw the series against Summon. That was theirs to take. And if it's FPX Heretics finals, they win handily. I think that literally it all boils down to the fact that FPX was undefeated running their Viper comp on bind. They tried to 5-head their way through the set with Summon, knowing that Summon also played the Viper comp on bind. They said, oh, we were the ones who quote unquote invented this. We're just going to beat them at our game. And we're going to play our old like hyper fundamentally strong composition with the Breach Brimstone, etc. And what they ultimately ended up doing is thinking themselves into a corner, overthought the hell out of it, and just lost. They literally lost to their own comp that they were undefeated with because they overthought it. And if they don't do that, I think they win First Strike. And then us putting them at the top of Europe is the obvious choice, so to speak. I think that it is literally a single decision is the only reason that FPX isn't considered the uniformly best team in Europe right now.
I still think Heretics is the better team because they've proven it, but I do think, for argument's sake, at least for this first episode, we really want to show and highlight how FPX, even with their embarrassing loss, I think, to Summon, as I would describe it. They still have the potential and the ability to be the best team in Europe. And I think that Dimisic move especially is, I guess, the opposite to the nail in the coffin. It's the icing on the cake more than anything, right?
Yeah. I mean, the only real question I have with that move will be language issues, because I mean, I actually had to go look this up because I kind of got mixed up on this. I forgot that Angel had a lot of pure CIS rosters back in the day. I thought he was, because I remember his 2017, 2018, 2019 Hellraise rosters where it was just eclectic, right? You had all nations, you had the United Nations in those rosters, right? So I kind of, he did run a lot of full CIS rosters. And the one thing I know is that Dimisic has, to my knowledge, never played in a English-speaking environment. So I would have to presume that team is going to have to go to Russian comms now. And Zipan, look, less of a problem with Zipan, to be honest. I think was the way Zipan plays and the way that Angel plays and the license they'll give him, I don't think he'll have a problem with that transition. Shadow might be a bit trickier. But apart from that, I think the Dimisic move is just the talent he has as a player and how he fits, particularly with regards to being able to play that side and being able to play to Angel's tempo and all of this sort of thing. I think it's a home run.
As bad as it sounds, I feel they've got lucky as well with how the meta's gone, because they never played Sage. That's fine. Sage got deleted from the game. They played a lot of Breach. They were one of the few teams to really dedicate to him full time. Breach got 3 flashes, right? A lot of stuff meta-wise really fell into their lap of how they play. I think that's the thing about why FPX is rated so highly now, because I don't think Meta was an inflexible player. He could play Killjoy when necessary. But if you get into a position where, for example, you just play 5 duelists, who's going to be better at that, FPX or Team Heretics? Now, when you look at the players involved, you got to say FPX, because whilst there was the meme of Angel playing Phoenix in that game against Team Oxygen, and they lost it.
They shouldn't be let to play on bind.
Just ban out bind.
Goes on bind.
I feel like when you look at it from that perspective, FPX wins out against Team Heretics when looking at the adaptability in the future. More than anything with that move with Dimisic, because he can play anything at the highest level, right?
I think that you hit the nail on the head. Like, this is sort of a framing of the way that I personally interpret a lot of teams' power, is that if you're looking at this game from a macro strategic perspective, you know that being able to adapt to new agents as they're released and play like different compositional blends is going to be absolutely critical to the way that the game is played. And we've already seen within less than a year of the game being out that you not only can't be like an agent one trick, you can't even be a role one trick. You have instances already where you have like TL and TSM and NA pulling out triple duelist. And so like you can't have a team where you have a dedicated support, a dedicated controller, a dedicated sentinel, and 2 duelist players. Because then if you have to play triple duelist, because that's the way the meta swings, who's your third duelist? I honestly think that that was basically the impetus that pushed FPX to replace Meadow, is that Meadow presumably wasn't inherently comfortable making a cross-role agent swap. And so they were like, even though this isn't like extremely pertinent right now, it's written on the wall now that if the meta shifts dramatically in one way or the other, we are susceptible to a hole in our team's ability to adapt. And I think that Heretics right now has shown no firm evidence of an ability to make that kind of adaptation.
But I think unanimous agreement that whilst FPX have not won anything, they are more likely to at least win the first chunk of Challengers, Masters, whatever we're calling it, this first quarter of tournaments of the major stuff with Riot. FPX are likely to win out over Team Heretics. We're all in agreement on that, right?
If it came to a finals between the two of them, I think FPX wins it 7 out of 10 times.
Yeah. I think I would put Heretics above FPX in my ladder, but I do think that because there's 3 of us, the majority wins. So this is what we're going with. There's still quite a lot happening. We've got a full list of teams here, some of which, like Summon, are most likely going to be coming in under a different brand. You've got
Need More DM is definitely coming in under a different brand.
Yeah, whatever the hell they're doing, right? You've got other orgs that we haven't mentioned that could do quite a lot. So yeah, that's the end of this first episode. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, if you want to keep seeing more. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.